Welcome to the Empowered Spirit Show. This is your host, Terri Ann Heiman. I'll explore the connection to the human spirit in a way that helps to navigate your life, including crisis. I am passionate about helping you to open up to your intuition and the metaphysical world of spirit to find your confidence in your own inner guidance. Take a pause, be inspired, learn ways to show up focused, centered, and more dynamic in your everyday life.
Welcome back to the Empowered Spirit Show. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me today. This episode is being sponsored by Ritual and Shelter. Are you looking for a magical place to shop and hold space? Check out Ritual and Shelter online or in Homewood, Alabama. Browse through their bookshelves covering topics such as energy healing, crystal healing, Reiki, chakras, auras, the Akashic Records, shadow work, astrology, and earth-based healing. You can also find herbal teas and tinctures alongside their crystals and oils to help establish a mindful mindset and fluid ambience before meditation, ritual work, and reflection. Ritual and Shelter is dedicated to providing one-on-one, in-depth conversations with customers to help them find the most efficient healing methods and resources that match their unique interest and energy. They offer tarot sessions, Reiki, sound bowl, and crystal healing, and now they are offering witch consultations. Visit ritualshelter.com to book an appointment and bring peace back to the body, mind, and spirit. You can also find them on Instagram at Ritual Shelter Shop, as well as Pinterest at Ritual Plus Shelter. As this podcast goes to air, we've just moved through the last full moon of spring, and we are headed right to the summer solstice, a fun time of year. As we experience the longest day of the year, the light is at its brightest. No wonder I love the solstice. I'm also a July baby and love that anticipation of the solar return and the longest day and all that renewal of energy coming forward. I think that little growing baby inside, right in the womb there, knows that anticipation of about to being born, knowing it's about to lose its comfort too of the warmth of the womb and out into the world. And so I think we can sense that. It is a natural act, yet we all start to have different ways of coming in and incarnating in how we do our earth walk. Earth walk. A term a shaman, Oscar Miro Casella, used this weekend at Impact in Atlanta. What a great event. And I got to meet Freddie Silva too. What a nice guy and what a great accent. But back to the earth walk. The earth walk is how we are living our path. It's about how you are showing up, being present to your soul, the awareness you have, the fear perhaps that you live with, or maybe the ability to let go and to continually grow and renewal energy, birth and death. We talked a little bit about death too, the death of our path and letting go, and how you can catch up with your soul all the time. You don't have to wait to your birthday, but all the time, the seasons help us to do that. And this is what I mean about caretaking your soul and your spiritual practice, really coming into alignment. Every phase is important. And when we can build a ritual and go through these transitions and honor that rebirth and that death, we can live in that seasonal transition and honor and create rituals for the bigger transitions that come in life to help us through, to help us grow and evolve that journey of the soul. And then we walk that path all the time. So maybe you wonder, how do you do this? How do you go about each season? I can help you with that. I've created a checklist, Caring for Your Soul, Nurturing Growth in the Divine Feminine. That's the energy of summer. DM me for the guide, or I'll put the link in the show notes. This checklist will guide you in a fun way to activate the tools to shape up, shape shift the body, mind, emotions, and spirit. This is the energy of summer. We have fun. We get out. It's the divine feminine energy, and it's that wild creativity coming forward. And it is about emotional empowerment to open up our lives. We find the element of water in summer. Water is the emotions of the heart. I do have some openings in my private mentoring program if you want to go a little deeper and learn how you can care for your soul, work through your emotions, shape shift your life, and grow as you care for that deeper part of you. Schedule a spiritual upgrade breakthrough call with me, and let's talk about the care of your soul. I'll put the links in the show notes. In today's episode, we go into a very touching conversation around death, dying, and the soul. My guest is Nancy MacMillan, the author of The Call to the Far Shore, carrying our loved ones through dying, death, and beyond. We talk about death. We talk about our moms and dads. We have such a tender conversation. The process, the grief, how death isn't talked about, listening, legacy, ancestors beyond the veil, and how we can continue our loving relationships with them. Before we begin, let's take a moment to pause and center and set an intention for this new season ahead. So wherever you are, if you can, close your eyes for a few moments. Taking a nice deep inhale, breathing up the body. And as you exhale, call all your energy in, centering, slowing down. Inhaling and exhaling, calling in the elements of fire, air, earth, and water. Calling in the energy of your spirit right into the deepest part of your heart. Take a deep inhale and exhale, feeling that awareness deep into the heart, your spirit, the connection to the greater spirit, source, creator. Know that you are loved, guided, protected. Calling in our Reiki master teachers, those that have come before us, the angels to open our heart with joy and love, the crystal beings for amusement and magnification. Feeling all this energy coming in around here as we take this time to honor this great wheel of life. Notice where you are, right here at the very edge of spring, opening up to that path of summer. Notice your growth. You can notice the weeds, but notice the blossoms, the blooming. Feel it all. Take a deep inhale and exhale as you set an intention. As you see yourself turning this wheel and moving into this new direction for your life. Feel and hear and see and know this intention. And allow the elevated feelings, how you want to be and feel, to elevate, radiate out from your heart all around you. Setting your aura. Taking another deep inhale and exhale. Shokure, 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 sealing it in. And now taking one more deep inhale to exhale and opening up the heart, opening up that third eye. And as you're ready, blinking the eyes back open. Coming back. Nancy MacMillan is a registered psychotherapist and former certified spiritual health practitioner who has worked in acute care, palliative care, and long-term care. Now in private practice, she also writes and teaches on her favorite topics: reimagining death, healing with our ancestors, raising healthy children, and listening to the whispers of the earth and the unseen worlds. From an early age, she explored the inner realms through dreams and meditation. Illness brought in unique lessons, ones that ultimately led her to work with the sick and dying in hospitals and long-term care. Tending to her mother's long dying time was both very difficult and greatly rewarding. So let us welcome Nancy to the show. Welcome, Nancy.
Well, thank you for having me, Terri. It's really good to be here.
It is, and what an important topic we're talking about today, a really deep one. And congratulations on your book, The Call to the Far Shore, Carrying Our Loved Ones Through Death, Dying, and Beyond. Wow. Yeah, congratulations on putting this out there.
Thank you. It was a bit of an undertaking, but when the different circumstances in my life just all gave me so many stories about what death looks like and what death can be like. And it just made me start writing, and then one thing led to the other, and it came through in with a lot of support from friends on this side and beloveds on the other side.
Yeah. So this is your work that you do, because I was going to ask what led you to writing it, but you have just shared with us that you have been working with this, and then the death of your mom probably had a lot to do with that.
Yes, it comes from different angles. One is my own experience with illness and facing cancer at a fairly young age. Being with both my parents when they died, that led me to want to be in this field because it just, my interest and my experience just drew me to want to learn more. So then I went into the field. I'm a psychotherapist, registered psychotherapist, and a registered spiritual health care provider. And I worked in palliative care in hospitals and in emergency rooms. And so I got to see a lot of death in different forms. And then finally working with my mom as she died and bringing her body home and being with her body and helping prepare and wash and be vigil with her for those 3 days just opened up so much of the beauty and the mystery that resides in being up close to death. So that's what prompted the writing, and then it just took off from there.
Yeah, I think you have a really good point that when we are able to sit and be with someone that's passing and experience some of that energy, I think many of us are called to continue learning and understanding more and more. It's hard to put into words what you feel, but there is definitely a power that's ignited within. When I was first ordained in New York, I'm an interfaith minister of spiritual counseling, which I was called upon during 9/11. So all the souls that were leaving then, and that's kind of when I stepped up. But I started noticing people were calling me. I don't know if they knew it or not, but near the end of their parents' life. And I started realizing like, uh-oh, here's another call. And they pass after we work. And so I started too learning more and more. So I agree with you on that.
Right. And the more we are, then, in many cases, the natural dying process has a lot of peace to it. And it can get caught up in the medical system where there's can be sometimes fear or a lot of medication or just not a lot of education about what death looks like. So we can end up getting fearful at the end instead of being a calm presence at the bedside. And of course, it is startling to hear a loved one having a grasping breath, staggered breathing, such changes in their pallor and their pulse. And so we get fearful, and then we call the ring bell, and people come, and we think they're suffering, and we give more medication, which can sometimes cloud that last moment. There's a fine art to pain medication, and our palliative care teams know that very well. So we can trust them and also know that not all end of life times requires a lot of pain medication. My mom, they wanted to give her pain medication because she was going into the staggered breathing and the rasping breath. But I'd seen enough. So I said, I don't see my mom suffering. I see her dying. And there is a difference there. And so they held off, and she was able to die without pain medication. And that just, to me, it just opened up a possibility that there was more consciousness at that last breath and more joy at being able to take that next step across the threshold to, a joyful homecoming.
Yeah, it struck me that you talked about that you asked not to have more medication. And I definitely recognize sometimes we need to ask for more, sometimes we
Mhm.
don't. But you did take that opportunity to be with the soul and to help with that caring, which I think is so important. I was first trained in the Tibetan Bardo. So we look for the elements and we clear the organs and I work with Reiki. So that was kind of where I came in from. And every culture has their own way. And recently I've been back in my community I was born to, and I've been learning more and more about the Jewish traditions and how we prepare the body for death there. And it's very interesting, the soul's journey. It's very interesting. And I think no matter what your background is or your culture, it's all coming from the same place, the energy of the soul.
That's right. And we all come from heritages that knew this and maybe had different maps about what it looked like on the other side or how to get there. But there was a map that provided some instruction and some support, in those critical times. So we can, they've had to change to because we've had to step away and become more conscious in making choices. So I understand how we've had to let go of some tradition. But I think we're at a point now where we've become free enough to not feel hindered by some of those traditions and to go back and see where the wisdom really lies and what has been lost by throwing it all out. And how can we bring back what is true and what can feed our need for, certainly at the end of life, to have some ceremony and some ritual that feeds our unconscious and subconscious needs for completion, and surely the needs of the person who's passing on can only support them on that journey.
Yeah, you bring some very important topics to mind here. Thoughts, I guess, really is, like how you said, like coming back to some of the traditions, but recognizing that where we are now, we need to apply where we are now to what those traditions are. Even in the work I do with the Heva Kadisha here in my community, I recently went on a training and learned about everybody's way of doing it and then brought it back to our community. And within our community, we got to like feel like, okay, some things do need to be clarified, cleared up. It's like when you do the same thing over and over and pass down the same thing, sometimes you don't know where it comes from. But I think it's so important that we do look at those traditions. And then we as our soul too get to decide, okay, whether it's a personal situation or a professional, right? How are we going to carry that on? Which is one of the great points in your book. Why don't we talk about this more? How valuable is it to bring this forward?
Right. And that speaks to the general fear that we hear that enough. So we do have this sense that there is a fear of death, and it doesn't take us long to get to that place, no matter what issue we may be coming to, say, therapy for. Sometimes it weaves around to that primal fear of death and letting go. So that's at a really archaic place of our psyche. But there's also in our society just this whole thing of becoming more isolated from the reality of it. We don't have people who die in our midst in front of us, or we don't have their bodies in our homes. So we've lost touch with it. We don't have animals that we see die in a farmyard. So it's part of just where we are as a society. So knowing that, how do we now lean into it and learn more? Can we go to the bedside of an ill and dying person and allow ourselves to observe and be a calm presence, and then read about what are the needs of a person at the end of their life, and how can we engage with this whole thing and befriend our end times, because we're all going to be there, and prepare and just do our due diligence so that we can come to our endings with a little more wisdom and participate in it.
I so agree. I mean, I talk about recently, I've just really started talking about it, about midwifing the soul. It's not just end of life. It's carrying through our soul's journey. And you get into a little bit of this too, like our soul in past lives and other lives and beyond the veil and how we can access that information. I think it's so valuable. I know for myself that I've been through several dark night of the souls, right? Who am I? What am I doing? A near death like experience, and right, and really had to reconcile some past soul energy to help me come back into the present and understand where I am. And I think that's part of it. And I think that can help us talk more and more
Mhm.
about the whole process and not save it to the end. I really do. And I like that you include all that in the book.
Right. And as you say, it's like meeting the moments in our life at each stage. There's different death processes happening for us all the time. All our small transitions, our dark nights of the soul, all are our testing ground. Can we let go at the edge and transform to that next part of who we are going to be? And all of that builds up our muscles so that for the big letting go at the end, we have some capacity. We're not starting from zero.
Yeah. And you bring a very important point forward, which I think can help more and more people be there for their loved ones, especially the idea of listening. Just like listening to them, listening to what their needs are, listening to what they're going through is a very valuable skill.
And letting death be in the room. So
Mm,
many people are afraid to bring up the word or the reality. And so the person going through it, they know, and they are left alone with their own reality in this facade of trying to protect everybody. But that makes an artificial reality, and it leaves our loved one alone in it, rather than being able to lean in and say, what is it like for you to be at this stage where, your death is around the corner? And tell us what it's like, because we need to learn, and then they can offer the riches of their struggles and their breakthroughs and their subtle, perhaps, perceptions that are becoming open. And then we can cry together. We can say, I'm going to miss you and how sorry I am, but oh, look at the times we've had together, or I'm sorry for this or that. It just brings the reality of relationship into the room in such a profound and real way, and gives the opportunity for clearing and opening the door to the next step.
Yeah, I had so many amazing conversations with my mom. I'd be sitting there, I remember the chair sitting by her bed, and some we would laugh, and then some we would go a
Mm.
little deep, and then we'd laugh a little more. I mean, it was such a valuable time together. And she passed on this tradition that I hold now in my community. She passed it on to me. So we had many conversations about the ceremonies, about the rituals, about going back to the earth. So we even got a little deeper too, rather than call your brother, that kind of thing. But
Yeah,
right, we had so many conversations. But as I mentioned to you, in the end, I was not with her. She waited until I left, but I remember the last moment of seeing her. She was all turned around in her bed, and she looked like she was like 15 years old. And she just looked up at me, and I still remember that moment. I was going all the way across the country to help my daughter. And she knew how important that was for me to do that. And it was like a generational thing too. Yeah, tears well up. I hear now going, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But sometimes that's what the soul does, right?
right. And that I hear that, and I can see that's still a bit of a sadness
It
that
is.
there
Yeah,
is
the
that,
tears. Yeah.
yes. So it's really helpful to know that sometimes that last step is really hard to do when your most beloved one is right with you, because you want to stay, and you know that they want you to stay. So so that is a choice that's taken. It's like, oh, I can do this now when they're out of the room, and they can take that last step. And so if you can trust that that's how she needed to do it, because she was so close to you, and could feel the pull to stay. And so I know, because I was with my father, and um, it was a remarkable moment, because it was fairly a new experience being with a dying person. And I was leaning forward into his space quite a bit, thinking he had died. The staggered breathing had happened, and he had taken the last breath, and there was nothing. And I was leaning in. And then I heard these words: back off. This is not for you.
Mm.
And it was the angel of death, is how I felt, and was like, get out of this space. You've taken him as far as you can. You can't go further. So I lay back down on the cot that had been put out for me, somehow fell asleep. And I don't know how much longer, but my cot collapsed, and it woke me up, and I'd heard the last breath. So that gave me a very visceral feel of, I can only go so far, and he needed to take his time. And same thing with my mother, the same thing happened.
Thank you. I never really thought about that. And I always wondered. So my father did die at home, and like, we couldn't wake him up from a nap at around 1 or 2. And my mom calls me to come over. And so we figured, and my understanding too is like, okay, the process is beginning. And so we started making phone calls, but he wanted to be in his bed, and he did. And his breaths were very, long in between. But there was a point during the night, because he took all day, right, to go. But there was a point during the day where I had to pull myself out. And we did have hospice help. And I was laying in the other room, so I was still there, and something did wake me up in that last moment. But I realize now too that I was there and there and there and there, and then I did go, and I kind of thought, like, shouldn't I know better? Like, shouldn't I stayed in there? And but it was like a little bit of judgment on my own self. But thank you for that. It's very fascinating to think about too. I never looked at it that way.
Right. And there was some
What
instinct telling you, get out of the room.
Yeah, yeah. It's just fascinating the energy we feel and what we set up and being with that soul at the last moments too. How important is that? How do you look at that?
Well, it's a real gift when you can be at that last moment because, if you've been able to create an environment where there is some peacefulness and some of the medical overtures have been able to be, put to the periphery, then you get a glimpse of the threshold, right? And as you say, your mom had this beautiful continence,
Mm,
and how often that was the experience of
mm.
when you get right up to that edge, an inner light starts glowing from within, and there's a more of a resonance with what is on the other side that's pulling them onwards, and you get to see that. And then death starts having a little bit of a different face to it. And we get to consider, can we make death a companion and not a foe? And see that our bodies know how to die and trust that a little bit more.
Death as a companion. I so agree. And I think the more we can talk about it, the better it is. I know in my world at the temple of the Havakadisha, it was always secret and it was always sacred. I mean, it was kind of like never talked
Uh-huh.
about. But I think because death was never talked about, and in the conference I went to, we discussed that. So coming back, bringing that to my community, people were like kind of surprised. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to talk about it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think what you're saying is like we need to talk about it. We need to find the beauty and the grace and how
Mm-hmm.
powerful that threshold is. And I'm a big, huge student of Dr. Brian Weiss, read him years ago, but one of his books, Messages from the Masters, I would read in between the lines. It was kind of reading in between the world and in between lives. And it just like it has so much beauty and so
Mm-hmm.
much depth.
We
Yeah.
trust birth. So birth and death are related, and they both are doors to the other side. So let's bring the two ends of life, in relationship again. Now, sometimes death doesn't have as much grace to it. If it's more sudden, it's more like a thunderclap rather than a ease of breath by breath letting go. And that can be harder. It can have shock and trauma associated with it, and our nervous systems, get totally disarranged from that. So it takes a longer period for people going through that to get acclimatized to this new place of missing their loved one. But over time, we have to lean into where do we find the gold of that relationship that still lives, but in a new way. How can we let the relationship of old keep evolving into something new so that our loved ones are not gone, they're in the next room? And how do we keep that connection to that next room?
Oh, I so agree. I so agree. And I think sometimes that is what happens when we start to work through some of that grieving process and that relationship starts to shift and change. I laugh all the time. My mother is now my time angel. I hear all the time, keeping me on time. It's like, why not? Why not have the amusement and the love and still feel some of that energy around us? Why not? Right?
Right. That was my feeling when my dad died. It was shortly after I had a dream that my hands and my arms were longer and bigger, and it was as if I could grasp more things. And it was like a picture of how he was going to be in my life. So that really started an imagination that he was present with me. And I have to say, I wasn't close to my father during my life. So that gives me hope for people who may not have had a great relationship, that our loved ones are not the same once they've crossed over. They have new capacities to see what their life was like and how their relationship with us was like. And it was like my dad wanted to make amends by helping me in how he could. But he could only do that if I opened the door for him and included him in my life. So, and how we do that will look a little different for each of us, whether it's, sitting quietly, like I did at the initial parts of sitting quietly. I invited him for coffee every once a week, where I would read to him something I knew he would like, or verses or something of a spiritual nature that felt I could reach into his realm and began just that imagination developing. And then putting pictures up and including him in conversations. Um, there's many ways, or then, exploring our ancestry is the other way to get into the roots of our heritage and the stories that have gone before. And that's such a rich exploration too, that brings where we come from more alive and more, we feel, I certainly have felt more grounded and that I come from somewhere by that exploration.
And I think you bring up the point, very good point, that when we do have this access to that energy and keep it going and bring in the energies and have conversations. I sit in the kitchen with my dad sometimes. I sit in the morning with him too. But I think that also is healing for our lineage, healing for all of our ancestors. I really do, because it's such a pure, innocent love. There's no judgment there, there's no conditions there. And so we can then heal both parts. And that is, I think, one of the ways. Because, okay, let's back up for a minute. We're sitting with them, and then we're here at this moment. Now what happens? The soul begins to transcend. And there are many ways to look at that. Where does the soul go?
That's right. And that's, beyond what I can know for sure to talk about. I can only, through my felt sense, know that there is something that is shining behind me that is helping life and love flow on through me and into the next, generations and those around me. And with that felt sense, I can trust that I can leave their stories behind. In fact, after delving into some of my ancestry and getting really curious and absorbed, I woke up with a dream that was said, forgive the past and walk the right way. So there's just the right amount of delving in to get grounded and find where your belonging is, but don't live back there.
I agree.
Just like we don't live forever in our mourning and grief. There's no way to go around it. We do have to go through it, but let there be a season to it and not our life.
Yeah. And every culture has its own season.
Yeah.
I was recently talking with one of the rabbis here in our community, and he was saying, the first 7 days for the soul are the hardest in transition. And, Tibetan culture teaches 30 days of the soul, so everybody has their own way. So, as your own individual, you can establish that. But I think sometimes having the rites, having the rituals, they also say in the Jewish tradition, 11 months of mourning for your parents, not your children, your parents. And then
Yeah.
the 12th month is when you kind of, symbolically you come out or go to the mikveh or whatever you do to kind of finish that. I found every month of that for my parents, because it was actually both of my parents. After my father died, I was concerned about my mother. But I found the ceremonies and the ritual to be very helpful. Very
Good.
helpful.
It's a
Yeah.
grounding thing and it orients our psyche. And, the language of symbol and myth and story or scripture um, speaks to a part of our psyche that perhaps we want to think that we are beyond. But I think when we get to the moments of crises or the thresholds, it's one of the few things that can satisfy something, a deep need in us. And sometimes that does mean going back to the foundations of our own heritage or what we grew up with, because that has informed us in some level and that will speak to us more deeply than something that we can just make up on the spot.
I agree with that. I know it did for me. And as an interfaith minister, sometimes people come to me without any kind. And so I go to, spirituality. I go to the earth, I go to some of those teachings. And I
Absolutely.
think that can be a helpful way for many too. And
Yes, I
honoring
certainly
that
say that
process.
too. In the hospital, many people would not have a religious tradition or have explored spirituality. So I would just always say, well, what is it that gives you strength? What has been your resources through your life that have helped you through hard times? And through exploring that, often there would come, whether it's nature or whether it's art or just the devotion to humanity, leaning into that, opens up doors that feed, our deeper needs.
Yeah. And I think this is why it's so important that we do talk about it, that we do have some ceremony, ritual around it. I mean, just every night, how my mom and I, we get ready for bed, and every night, See you in the morning, God willing, she'd say every night, right? And so it
Oh,
became like
yeah.
that was part of our ritual there. And so then you find those other kind of rituals to move through because, yes, after the soul is transcending, the soul's got to do what it's got to do, but then the family is left. And there's
Right.
many aspects to that that can get complicated and, depending on how the family was being raised, right? Again, going back to how we live is how we die, how we work with our family and our traditions and talk to each other and listen to each other. I mean, I know every family's got its story, right? But I think this is why tuning into our own
Mhm.
spirit to start with, our own soul. Yeah.
Right. And listening and knowing, just like you can hear your mom say, God willing. There was many times where, I would be, fraught with angst around, my mom dying and getting angry with my sister or whatever. But I could hear my father say, leave your sister alone. Right? Like we all have our own thing to do. And thank
Yeah.
goodness for that, because we were able to travel through that in good relationship.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think when we can spend time with ourselves and just even hear ourselves, that allows us to open up. We carry the DNA. So we can open that up and we can stretch that. We can honor, like you said, okay, enough. I honor that enough. Let's go. Let's move this way. Right. And I've had to do a lot of that, especially coming back to my birth town, coming back to my hometown and really looking at the energy. Why did I leave? And I sometimes say, I ran out of here. I was born in the late 50s, so I was Jewish and Southern, right? And it was like, oh my gosh, so much shelter. And I couldn't understand like all of the, anti-Semitism. I mean, it's still going on, my goodness, right? But I ran from it. And so to
Right.
come back to your roots and to understand and to love those parts of you and your family and even digging deeper, deeper and deeper and deeper, I think that's so valuable all through life, which I also think is a great point of your book.
Thank you. And I love hearing how, that you found yourself back in your home roots, because the land itself has a voice in your being and wanted some, connection, and that you're able to recognize that, even though it might not be a perfect match in other ways, but the land itself, the earth itself, is a being that speaks through us as another kind of ancestor.
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time on the earth. My dad left us some property, and yeah, rock by rock, I built a medicine
Yeah.
wheel basically, and would just
Okay.
go there. And especially it started when my dad was alive, but then with my mom and just live with her, I'd go up there and I would just cry and I would build these paths. I never even really knew how I had, helped one of my teachers set one up, but I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And so the earth is important, and we do
And
go
it's the
back to
earth,
the
how
earth.
our loved ones can speak to us through the earth too, right?
Yeah,
So many
yeah.
people, when I ask them, if they had any experiences of their loved ones after they died, and even those who have very little spiritual or religious background, will all have sort of peculiar, synchronistic, interesting stories. The show about the cardinal that lights at the right time, or the rainbow, or the butterfly, or the fox that runs. So somehow, as we transition, excarnate, we are in a new relationship with the earth, and we use all vehicles of the earth to communicate and bring sacred messages.
I love that. I love that because it comes down to its basic elements, the fire, the air, the earth, the water,
Right.
right? Yeah. And then we come into form and then we have all these creation and all of our stories of life and so on and so forth. But, right? I think that's the power and the depth of our soul. And these are what we're coming in to learn. And the more we can have the opportunity to open up and learn about it and talk about it, whether they're still here or up there or somewhere else, right? I think it's like just so powerful. And I know it has tremendously helped me just to move through that year, and then the world shut down, and that it's just like, oh my gosh. And just to have that love and compassion in my heart and bring these messages. I did a lot of deep soul work during that time. Like I
Mhm.
mentioned, I had that near death experience that like sent me on a huge like what is going on, and just really opened my soul so much that I had to really kind of pull it all back in. And now the depth and the knowledge is really amazing. And so when we do take the time, right, and really honor, and I have and and have conversations like this. I think it's really important. And your book goes through so many great topics. It really does, about the hard conversations and the deep dives and the generations and, becoming an ancestor. I really, like we're talking about, like, oh, yeah, I am. I will be. Yeah, an ancestor, right? That kind of thing, too. But really, all the way through the last breath and the grief and the conversations and spirituality, you really go through so many great conversations. And then the touching story of your own mom in there, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And the biggest message that I get over and over again through whether it's my own illnesses and the messages or with my ancestors is that we are not alone. And I think
Yeah.
that's, sort of the mantra that many of us hear when we tune in. And don't we just need to hear that? And that help is there if we open our hearts and ask for what we could use help with, and name our loved one, create a little image of them so that we're making a picture, and they can kind of, in our imagination and our pictures, it's a way for them to direct their force of love and their help through. So just becoming more conscious of these small little things that we can do to open up the door between our worlds and let each other help each other. We can help them, and they, by turning their gaze on us, help us by looking at us, acting through us, and helping our strength get more enabled.
Yeah, I so agree. And I never really thought those moments that I sometimes go back and dream with my dad in the kitchen. That's exactly what you're saying. Like, make it up, call it in, use your imagination, have those little tea parties we did as kids. But those
Mhm.
extend those moments. And it's just such a beautiful time. And I can still, like, yeah, sometimes just feel I'd run Reiki on my dad and he'd go, he'd sit there for a few moments and we would just be together and quiet and right there at his fish tank, right? And then I
Uh-huh.
could tell he's enough, like, go on. I know you must be busy. But we had those, 5, 7 minutes together where really it was just being. It was so
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
And
And
you,
so to
by
be
you
able to go
saying
back
that,
and do that.
I can feel it. Like when you say that, it's a living picture, right? It's not a
Yeah.
dead one. Like our thoughts
Yeah.
can be kind of dead, and our loved
Yeah.
ones can't interact with dead thoughts. They need lively, imaginative pictures, and then they feed them, and then we're in relationship.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I am so grateful for this conversation. I could go on, but where can I direct people to find your work? Do you teach? You write? I know that. What else?
Certainly the book has been the main work right now, but I am continuing the writing with all these themes on a Substack newsletter that I write regularly on. So I welcome people to check that out. That's nancymacmillan.substack.com. And you can sign up for free postings. And I also have a website, nancymacmillan.com. You can see the breadth of my work and also past writings and more information on the book. And I'll hope to be writing a little guide for perhaps a study on the book and the topics, because I've had a number of people say they'd like to have a book club on these topics and to get some assistance with how to formulate a study group on these themes.
I think that's a fantastic idea. Yeah, I'm in a book club right now in our community from the Book of Joy. So I think this is a great
Ah,
one. And our next topic will be death, dying, sadness. Yeah, that will be our next gathering. What a great idea. And a huge shout out to Inner Traditions for bringing this forward. So grateful for them and all the many topics and people and great work that they bring forward. Yeah. So, Nancy, I know we've talked about so many great things, but if you could leave our listeners with an uplifting thought on how you feel that the work that you're doing, carrying our loved ones through death and dying and beyond, can help to empower the spirit right now.
right. I think by engaging with our own death and the death of each other and the world, we lean into a place where it's actually a transformative and radical act to finding meaning and purpose once again on our earth with each other.
Radical act, defining purpose and meaning
Yeah,
right here, right now
right
on
now.
our earth walk. Yeah. Well, again, I am just so grateful for the conversation. Thank you so much. Best of wishes with the work that you do. Thank you.
And to you too, Terry. Bless you.
Yeah, to your spirit. These are the conversations we can have with our loved ones. And it doesn't just have to be at death. How we live our earth walk is how we will die. Being present and open to the journey of your soul can bring about a depth and a deep, loving energy for your walk. Those last moments with both my parents and others I have helped give me a sense of my soul and how we all can connect with the master energy. Ready to have that conversation with your own soul, but not sure how? Reach out and schedule a spiritual upgrade breakthrough call with me, and let's talk. Thanks again for listening. Be sure to share this with someone who can use this conversation. Leave me a review. It helps the podcast to be found. I am your host, Terri Ann Heiman, to your spirit. Namaste.